Greetings, my fellow knights. Tonight we journey to the ancient lands of Greece, where gods and legends shape the world of myth. Before you drift into comfort, take a second to like and subscribe, and share in the comments what kind of myths or tales you'd like to hear next. I always enjoy seeing our little knightly circle spread across the world. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. Origins from Chaos to Olympus. Greek myth of beginnings described how order arose from chaos and how the Olympian gods came to rule. The account presented a sequence of generations, with each change bringing a different balance of power. It focused on the emergence of earth, sky, and the deep abyss, and on the struggle between an older group of deities and a younger one. It explained how the world took shape, how authority passed from one ruler to another, and how the main gods were established. It did not present a single author's voice, but reflected a remembered story that had been told in many places. It favored the theme of succession and the settling of claims. It ended with Zeus and his family in control of a stable order. It left room for later tales by introducing many divine figures who would act in subsequent episodes. The setting lay in a time before human history, when places were described by their nature rather than by geography. The early stage included chaos, a yawning gap, and realms like Gaia, who was Earth, and Tartarus, a deep chasm below. The sky stretched above as Uranus, and the sea formed as a surrounding expanse. Mount Olympus served later as the seat of rule for the victorious gods. The underworld existed as the domain below, distinct from Tartarus, which functioned as a prison for defeated powers. The world was not mapped as a nation might be mapped. It was named by qualities and distances that did not follow measured lines. The duration of these events was not given, and the precise locations of some episodes remained unspecified. The principal figures began with chaos, from which Gaia and Tartarus appeared. Some accounts also named Eros as a principle of attraction, but many details about Eros in this phase were unclear. Gaia brought forth Uranus, who became the sky and lay over her. From the union of Gaia and Uranus came the Titans, a broad group that included Oceanus, Coeus, Cricus, Hyperion, Iapetus, Theia, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, Tethys, and Cronus. 3 Cyclopes also arose, named Bronte, Steropes, and Arges, known for forging thunder. 3 Hecatontures appeared as well, named Briareus, Cottus, and Gyges, known for their 100 hands. Cronus stood out among the Titans for his ambition, and Rhea was both his sister and later his consort. From the next generation came Zeus and his siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. The relationships defined the lines of loyalty and conflict that shaped the story. The first important turn involved Uranus and the children he fathered with Gaia. Uranus disliked certain offspring and hid them within Gaia, causing her distress. Gaia fashioned a flint sickle and sought someone to use it. Cronus agreed and lay in wait. When Uranus came to Gaia, Cronus struck and cut him away from Gaia with the sickle. From the blood that fell on earth came the Erinyes, known as Furies, as well as the giants and the Melaia, who were ash tree nymphs. From seed that fell into the sea came Aphrodite, who rose from foam near Cythera and later near Cyprus, depending on the telling. With Uranus removed, Cronus became the leading figure among the Titans. He took Rhea as consort and established his rule. The older generation moved to the background, and the younger Titans took their places. Cronus heard a prophecy that one of his children would depose him, as he had deposed Uranus. He responded by swallowing each child at birth. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon were taken in this way. Rhea lamented and sought counsel from Gaia and from Uranus. She conceived Zeus and carried him to term in secret. The place where Zeus was born was reported differently in ancient sources, but Crete was commonly named. Rhea gave Cronus a stone wrapped in swaddling in place of the infant, and Cronus swallowed it. Zeus grew in hiding, nurtured away from his father. The details of his upbringing varied. In some accounts, a goat named Amalthea provided milk, and armed attendants masked the sound of the child. The main point remained that Zeus survived and matured until he could act. When Zeus reached his strength, he returned to confront Cronus. With the help of Metis, a daughter of Oceanus and Tethys, he gave Cronus a substance that caused him to disgorge what he had swallowed. The stone came up, followed by Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, who emerged whole and alive. Zeus then freed the Cyclopes and the Hecatontures from their confinement, where they had been kept by Uranus and later neglected or restrained by Cronus. In gratitude, the Cyclopes forged gifts. They gave Zeus the thunderbolt, Poseidon the trident, and Hades a helmet known for conferring concealment. The Hecatontures agreed to fight beside them. Allies joined Zeus, including Styx and her children, who became associated with solemn oaths. The conflict that followed was called the Titanomachy. It lasted for a long span described as 10 years. The Titans who supported Cronus held Mount Othrys, while Zeus and his allies established themselves near Mount Olympus. The fighting was heavy and went back and forth. The outcome favored Zeus. Guided by counsel and using the strength of his allies, he broke the opposition. The Hecatoncheires hurled boulders in volleys, and the thunderbolt split the ranks of the Titans. Those who resisted were defeated and sent down to Tartarus, where the Hecatoncheires were set as guards. Some Titans did not fight and were spared. Atlas, who supported Cronus, was given the task of bearing the sky at the edge of the world. After the war, Gaia and Tartarus brought forth Typhon, a monstrous challenger. Typhon rose against Zeus and threatened the order that had been won. The contest with Typhon ended with Zeus victorious, and Typhon was pressed under Mount Etna or confined elsewhere depending on the account. With the threats suppressed, Zeus and his brothers divided the realms by lot. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld. Earth and Olympus were common to all. The Olympian order began, with Zeus as king, Hera as queen, and the other gods taking roles that would shape later stories. Ancient poets and storytellers preserved this sequence in different ways. Hesiod's Theogony presented a structured version of the cosmogony and the succession. The Homeric poems referred to events and relationships, but did not detail the entire chain. Later compilers, such as Apollodorus, offered summaries that combined strands from various sources. Some variants stated that Aphrodite was the daughter of Zeus and Dione, rather than born from the sea foam. Accounts of Zeus's upbringing differed in the names of helpers and the places mentioned. Details about the length of the wars and the exact locations remained unstated. Despite variations, the core idea was consistent. The world moved from a dense and constricted beginning through conflict to an organized rule under Zeus. With Olympus established, the framework was set for the deeds of gods and heroes that followed. Chapter 2. The Titanomachy and the Rise of Zeus. The Titanomachy described the long conflict between the older Titans and the younger Olympian gods, and it explained how Zeus came to rule. The tale presented a sequence of successions, from primordial beings to Titans to Olympians. It showed how power changed hands and how order was established. Its central focus remained on the struggle between Cronus and his son Zeus. It also included the roles of allies who tipped the balance. Ancient poets used this story to frame the structure of the Greek cosmos. The account set the stage for later myths by placing Zeus and his siblings at the head of a new divine order. The setting belonged to the earliest mythical age, before there were cities or kings. It took place across the sky, the earth, the sea, and the deep pit called Tartarus. The Titans were said to gather on Mount Othrys, which lay in central Greece. Zeus and his allies were said to hold Mount Olympus to the north. Caves in Crete featured in accounts of Zeus's upbringing. The river Ocean encircled the world as a great stream. The time reference was remote and undefined, and the actions unfolded in a sacred past. The principal figures were the Titan Cronus and the Olympian Zeus. Cronus had been the youngest son of Gaia and Uranus. He took Rhea as his consort. Their children were Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. Gaia, the Earth, supported several generations and advised them at critical moments. The one-eyed Cyclopes and the Hundred-Handers, also called the Hecatoncheires, were older divine beings. They were sons of Gaia and Uranus as well. The Cyclopes forged powerful weapons. The Hecatoncheires each had many arms and great strength. Other titans included Oceanus, Tethys, Hyperion, Thea, Coeus, Phoebe, Iapetus, Creus, and Themis. Some stood against Zeus, and some stayed apart. The goddess Styx brought her children Zealous, Nike, Kratos, and Bia to support Zeus. The goddess Metis, a daughter of Oceanus and Tethys, aided Zeus with counsel. After their introduction, the figures kept their roles throughout the conflict. The setup began with an earlier succession. Uranus had ruled the sky and kept his children down. Cronus, urged by Gaia, overthrew Uranus and took power. A prophecy warned that Cronus would be overthrown by his own offspring. To prevent this, he swallowed his children at birth. Rhea mourned and sought relief. When Zeus was born, Rhea hid the infant in a cave on Crete and gave Cronus a stone wrapped like a baby. Cronus swallowed the stone, believing it was his son. Zeus grew up away from his father's reach. Accounts named nymphs and a goat called Amalthea as helpers, but details varied by source. When Zeus reached maturity, he returned in disguise. Metis provided a drug or a plan that caused Cronus to release the swallowed children. The elder siblings emerged alive and joined Zeus. With his brothers and sisters free, Zeus faced the problem of Cronus's forces. He sought allies to match the Titan's strength. Gaia advised him to release the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, whom Uranus and later Cronus had confined in Tartarus. Zeus descended, defeated their guards, and freed them. In gratitude, the Cyclopes armed the new gods. They forged the thunderbolt for Zeus, the trident for Poseidon, and the helm of invisibility for Hades. The Hecatoncheires agreed to fight on Zeus's side. Styx arrived first among the gods to pledge loyalty to Zeus. Her children became his steadfast attendants. The Titans rallied around Cronus and held the heights of Mount Othrys. The Olympians took position on Mount Olympus. The stage for a long war stood ready. The war was said to have lasted 10 years. It advanced in long periods of stalemate broken by sudden gains. Zeus directed assaults with the thunderbolt, while Poseidon struck with the trident. Hades used the helm to move unseen and disrupt the enemy. Athena, born later in some accounts, did not take part in this conflict. Sources disagreed on her origins, so a neutral note applied here. The Hecatoncheires turned the tide by hurling massive stones in rapid succession. The earth shook, and the sky flashed with fire from the Cyclops' gifts. One by one the Titans gave way. Oceanus kept apart in some versions and did not fight. Atlas, a Titan associated with the western edge of the world, stood against Zeus and was captured. When the Titans' line broke, Zeus pressed his advantage. Cronus's supporters retreated, and the war ended with the downfall of the old regime. After the defeat, Zeus imposed a settlement. Cronus and most of the Titans who fought against the Olympians were confined in Tartarus. The Hecatoncheires became their guards. Atlas received a distinct burden and was made to hold up the sky at the far west. The world was then divided by lot among Zeus, Poseidon and Hades. Zeus received the sky and the broad oversight of gods and men. Poseidon received the sea and all its depths. Hades received the underworld. The earth and Olympus remained common ground under Zeus's authority. With this order in place, Zeus confirmed honors and roles for allies. Styx gained a central river of oath in the underworld as a sign of her early allegiance. The Cyclops continued their craft. The Hecatoncheires stood as watchmen over the defeated Titans. Ancient sources preserved variations. Hesiod's Theogony gave the most complete early account and set the 10-year span and the role of Gaia's council. The library attributed to Apollodorus provided a later summary with added names and details, including the trick with the emetic. Some poets listed the Cyclops by name, while others kept them anonymous. The part of Oceanus shifted between neutrality and mild opposition, depending on the region. Philosophers treated the tale as a story of generational change, while cult practice acknowledged Zeus's kingship without revisiting the war. Roman authors equated Cronus with Saturn, and adapted parts for their calendar lore. Across these versions, the main outcome stayed the same. The Olympian order began with the victory of Zeus and his siblings, and set the frame for the myths that followed. Chapter 3. The Titanomachy and the Rise of Olympus. The Titanomachy described the long war between the younger Olympian gods and the elder Titans, and it explained how a new divine order replaced an older one. At its core, the conflict concerned succession and control of the cosmos. The narrative followed Zeus, who challenged the rule of Cronus, and it traced the alliances that formed around both leaders. The outcome reshaped divine hierarchy, determined the boundaries of power, and introduced the structures that later myths assumed as given. The story provided reasons for Zeus's authority, the roles of his siblings, and the fate of defeated Titans. It also offered an origin for certain divine symbols, such as the thunderbolt, and for institutions like oaths by the river Styx. In its settled form, the tale became the principal account of how Mount Olympus gained primacy and how the Titans were removed from the surface of the world. The setting lay in mythic time before human history, when the world had been organized but not yet firmly governed by its final rulers. The places named were familiar in later Greek geography, but presented on a larger scale. The Titans gathered at Mount Othrys, which served as their stronghold. The Olympians formed at Mount Olympus, which stood as their rallying point, and later home. Tartarus, a deep and shadowed region beneath the earth, functioned as a prison for defeated enemies and a boundary marking the lowest reaches of the world. Other scenes included Crete, where Zeus had been reared, and broad regions of Thessaly, where battles were said to have raged. Early sources did not agree on precise battlefield locations or sequences of engagements, so exact details remained unstated. The principal figures included Cronus and Rhea, who were Titans and parents to the first generation of Olympians. Cronus had overthrown his own father, Uranus, and feared the same fate. Rhea, seeking to preserve her children, acted to protect Zeus. The Olympians were Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, and Hades, who were siblings. Zeus led them. Several elder beings allied with Zeus after he rose to power. The Cyclopes, one-eyed smiths, and the Hecatoncheires, giants with many hands, had been imprisoned by Cronus and became powerful allies when freed. Styx, a goddess associated with a sacred river, brought her children Nike, Kratos, Baia, and Zealous to support Zeus. Some Titans took part under Cronus, including Iapetus, Coeus, Crius, Hyperion, and their kin. Oceanus was often described as neutral. Atlas, a son of Iapetus, later received a distinct punishment. The stance of Prometheus and Epimetheus, sons of Iapetus, varied by account, so no single summary applied with certainty. The setup to war began with Cronus's desire to prevent succession. He swallowed his children at birth. Rhea deceived him by hiding Zeus on Crete and presenting a stone wrapped in swaddling instead. Zeus grew to adulthood in concealment. The caretakers named in different traditions were not consistent, so a single version could not be fixed here. When Zeus was ready, he returned and compelled Cronus to disgorge his swallowed siblings. Accounts attributed this to the use of a potion or to direct force. The freed Olympians joined Zeus. He then freed the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires from Tartarus. In gratitude, the Cyclopes forged Zeus's thunderbolt, Poseidon's trident, and Hades' helm of invisibility. These gifts became emblematic tools of their domains. Styx arrived first among the deities to pledge to Zeus, and by this pledge the river Styx became the standard of unbreakable oaths among gods. With oaths sworn and allies assembled, the sides formed, and the long conflict began. The war extended for 10 years. According to the most influential account, the Titans held Mount Othrys, and the Olympians held Mount Olympus. The battles were described as drawn-out struggles of endurance, rather than brief campaigns. Gaia, the earth, provided counsel that victory would come if Zeus fully employed the strength of the Hecatoncheires. When they entered the fighting, their many hands hurled a continuous barrage of stones that broke the Titan lines. The Olympians pressed the advantage as thunder, trident wrought seas, and the cover of the helm created confusion among their foes. Against this combined force, the Titans lost ground, and the war turned decisively. Cronus's coalition collapsed, and several of his principal supporters were overrun. The capture of Mount Othrys marked the end of organized resistance. The defeated Titans were bound and cast into Tartarus under the watch of the Hecatoncheires, who stood as appointed jailers. Atlas received the burden of holding up the sky at the world's edge, a penalty that matched his leadership role in the Titan ranks. After the victory, the Olympians settled the division of authority. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots to apportion the main regions. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon took the sea, and Hades took the underworld. The earth and Mount Olympus were held as common ground and residence. With Zeus recognized as king and arbiter, Hera became queen among the Olympians. Demeter oversaw the fertility of the earth, and Hestia tended the household and the sacred hearth. Honors went to allies who had supported the cause. Styx obtained the role of witness to divine oaths. Nike embodied victory and stood near Zeus. The Cyclopes continued as divine craftsmen. The Hecatoncheires remained at the gates of Tartarus as guardians of the defeated Titans. Prometheus and Epimetheus took on roles in later narratives concerning the shaping of mortal life and the management of gifts, though those belonged to subsequent episodes. With the war concluded and offices assigned, the new order stabilized and governed the mythic world. Ancient sources varied in detail. Hesiod's Theogony provided the most influential outline of the Titanomachy, including the 10-year span, the gifts from the Cyclopes, the pledge of Styx, and the imprisonment of the Titans. Apollodorus, in a later compilation, supplied lists of participants and emphasized Atlas's punishment. Other traditions adjusted the cast of allies, the timing of Zeus's freeing of the Cyclopes, and the roles of Prometheus and Epimetheus. Some accounts set a later challenge by Typhoeus, or distinguished a separate Gigantomachy, which should not be confused with the Titanomachy, though storytellers sometimes blended them. The specific sites and sequences of battles were not uniform across regions. Despite these differences, the central result remained consistent. The Olympians prevailed, the Titans were confined, and a durable structure for divine rule took shape, with Zeus recognized as its head and Mount Olympus established as its center. Chapter 4. Prometheus, Pandora, and the First Humans. Prometheus and Pandora formed a paired tradition that explained how humans received fire, why they faced hardship, and how the gods asserted their order. The accounts placed Prometheus as a clever helper of humanity, and set Pandora as the bearer of an unexpected burden. Together, their stories offered an origin for human craft and an explanation for daily troubles. The narrative also connected divine justice with human experience, showing how choices and consequences linked gods and mortals. Ancient poets, especially Hesiod, arranged these episodes to mark a turning point after the new rule of Zeus. The setting belonged to the early age after the Titans had been overthrown and the Olympian gods had established authority. The gods resided on Mount Olympus and met in councils that guided the world. Humans lived on Earth in simple conditions that lacked many arts. A place called Mecone marked a formal division of offerings between gods and mortals, though its location was not clearly fixed. The punishment of Prometheus unfolded on a rocky mountain in the far north or east, identified in many accounts as the Caucasus. The making of Pandora took place on Olympus. The principal figures stood in close relation. Prometheus, a son of Iapetus and Clymene, was a titan known for foresight and craft. His brother Prometheus, whose name marked afterthought, acted with less care. Zeus, the king of the gods, ruled and guarded divine order. Athena guided skill and intelligence. Hephaestus shaped things with fire and metal. Hermes carried messages and sometimes brought guileful gifts. Pandora, created by the gods and endowed with many attributes, became the first woman in this tradition and the wife of Prometheus. An eagle named Aethon carried out Zeus's punishment against Prometheus. Heracles, many generations later, played a role in an eventual release. The origin of the first humans differed by source. Some said Prometheus formed them from clay, and some assigned their appearance to other gods. Events began at Mycone, where Prometheus arranged a test that defined the shares in sacrifice. He cut an ox and wrapped bones in shining fat, while he hid the good meat inside the less appealing stomach. Zeus chose the portion with fat, and thus accepted bones and smoke as the divine share. By this choice, humans kept the meat of sacrifices for themselves. Zeus considered the trick a challenge to his authority, and, in anger, removed fire from human reach. Humans then lived without the means to cook food or forge tools. Prometheus responded by climbing to Olympus and stealing a spark of fire. He hid the spark in the hollow of a fennel stalk and carried it to Earth. With fire returned, humans developed cooking, pottery, metalwork, and other crafts. Zeus answered with a layered punishment. He ordered Hephaestus to bind Prometheus with unbreakable chains to a remote mountain crag. There, Aethon, the great eagle, came each day and ate Prometheus's liver, which grew back each night. The torment continued for a long span. Zeus also devised a separate answer for humankind. He commanded Hephaestus to fashion a woman from clay and water. Athena clothed her and taught her weaving. Aphrodite gave charm and desire. Hermes bestowed craftiness of speech. The assembled gods gave further gifts and named her Pandora, the one endowed with all gifts. Hermes took Pandora to Prometheus, who accepted her despite Prometheus's warning not to receive gifts from Zeus. The outcome unfolded in the household of Prometheus. Pandora carried a sealed jar that she opened, and troubles spread across the human world. Illness, toil, and grief escaped, and they could not be gathered back. One thing remained inside the jar. Hesiod called it Elpis, which meant expectation or hope. Whether Elpis staying inside was a comfort or another limitation was not resolved by a single interpretation. Meanwhile, Prometheus continued to suffer until a later age. When Heracles passed the Caucasus on his travels, he killed the eagle with an arrow and freed Prometheus from the chains. In some accounts, Zeus allowed the release after receiving counsel or an exchange of pledges, and in some, Prometheus wore a ring of iron and stone to mark the binding as still fulfilled. The main sources for these episodes came from Hesiod's Theogony and Works and Days, which presented the Mycone trick, the theft of fire, the making of Pandora, and the jar in a connected way. Aeschylus's tragedy Prometheus Bound extended the character of Prometheus as a suffering benefactor and set the binding in stark detail, though exact authorship of the surviving text remained debated. Later versions sometimes called Pandora's vessel a box, but the older word described a jar, a pithos. Accounts differed over the location of Mycone and over the meaning of Elpis. Some told that Athena protected the first crafts, and some expanded the list of gifts to Pandora. Through these traditions, the stories of Prometheus and Pandora explained how humans gained fire and why life included hardship, and they quietly linked divine order with the daily work of mortals. Chapter 5. The 12 Labours of Heracles. The 12 Labours of Heracles formed one of the central cycles of Greek myth, presenting a sequence of tasks that restored order and reputation after a period of disruption. They were framed as atonement and as service to a king who sought to control and test a powerful hero. The cycle showed how strength, endurance, and judgment were applied to creatures and places seen as wild or resistant to human rule. Over time, the labours became a familiar structure through which communities explained landmarks, rituals, and the spread of civilization. The stories circulated widely, and artists and storytellers used them to set a pattern for heroic action. The setting belonged to the mythic age of heroes, placed before the Trojan War and not tied to a precise calendar. The first tasks occurred in the northeastern Peloponnese, near the hills and valleys of Nemea and Lerna. Later journeys sent the hero north into Thrace and west toward lands described as lying near the edges of the world. One voyage took him to Crete, and another to the island called Erythea. A final descent led him to the realm of Hades. The terrain shifted from forests and mountains to shores and distant islands, each presented as a distinct challenge. The sequence followed an internal order rather than a fixed historical timeline. Hercules, son of Zeus and Alcmene, stood at the center. Hera, the wife of Zeus, opposed him throughout his life, which colored many events surrounding the labors. Before the cycle began, Heracles had married Megara and had children. Tragedy struck when Hera's hostility led to a madness, during which he killed them. Seeking purification, he consulted the Pythia at Delphi and accepted servitude under Eurystheus, king of Tyrins and Mycenae, who became his commanding authority. Iolaus, a nephew, sometimes accompanied and assisted him. Athena and Hermes were occasional divine supporters, offering advice and tools when needed. Other figures appeared as the tasks unfolded. Augeas, a king with vast stables; Diomedes, a Thracian ruler; Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons; Geryon, a formidable being with more than one body; and Atlas, the Titan who bore the heavens. Hades, Persephone, and the hound Cerberus belonged to the final episode. These relationships framed the tensions between mortal duty, divine influence, and royal command. The early labors established the pattern of impossible tasks brought to resolution through a combination of force and method. First, Heracles confronted the Nemean lion, whose hide resisted weapons. He tracked it into a cave and strangled it, then skinned it with its own claws and wore the hide as armor. Second, he faced the Lernaean hydra, a serpent with regenerating heads. He fought it in the marshes near Lerna, while Iolaus cauterized the necks to prevent new growth. Hera sent a crab to hinder him, which became a minor detail in the tradition. Heracles dipped his arrows in the hydra's venom afterward, and Eurystheus later discounted this labor because of the assistance. Third, he tracked the Cyrenian hind, a swift deer sacred to Artemis. He pursued it for a long time, captured it without injury, and released it after presenting it. Fourth, he subdued the Erymanthian boar by driving it into deep snow and binding it, while a separate encounter with unruly centaurs arose in some versions around his stay with the centaur Pholus. Fifth, he agreed to clean the Augean stables in a single day, whose filth had accumulated over many years. He diverted nearby rivers to wash the stalls, but the bargain he made for payment caused Eurystheus to disallow this labor as well. Sixth, he dealt with the Stymphalian birds that terrorized a lakeside region. With the help of Athena, who provided rattles to startle them, he brought them down with arrows or drove them away, restoring calm around the lake. The later labors broadened the scope of travel and the range of challenges, while maintaining the same measured progress from disorder to resolution. Seventh, he captured the Cretan bull, wrestled it to submission, and brought it to Eurystheus. Eighth, he went to Thrace for the mares of Diomedes, fierce creatures kept by a violent king. He ended the danger by turning Diomedes' own power against him, and led the now tractable horses away. Ninth, he sailed to the land of the Amazons for the belt of Hippolyta. He met the queen, and in some accounts received the belt willingly. In others, Hera spread the rumor that he intended harm, leading to a clash that forced a different outcome. 10th, he crossed vast distances to reach Erythea, where Geryon kept fine cattle under the guard of Eurytion and the hound Orthus. Heracles took the herd after overcoming the Guardians, and led it back through regions that attached their own place stories to his passage. 11th, he sought the apples of the Hesperides, guarded in a far western garden by the nymphs and the dragon Ladon. Guided by prior counsel, he found Atlas and agreed to hold the heavens while Atlas fetched the apples. Through care and planning, he had Atlas resume his burden and returned with the fruit. 12th, he descended to Hades with the permission of its rulers to bring Cerberus up without using edged weapons. He mastered the hound by strength and returned it as required, closing the cycle. With the completion of these tasks, his service under Eurystheus ended, and his reputation as a bringer of order stood confirmed. He then resumed a life of further travels, and deeds that belonged to other cycles. Ancient sources differed on the sequence and details, and local traditions sometimes placed individual labors in new settings to explain landmarks or rituals. Some accounts said that the labor of the Hydra did not count because of Iolaus's help, and the cleansing of the stables did not count because Heracles had asked for payment, bringing the total to 12 by adding 2 more tasks. Vase paintings and temple sculptures favored certain scenes, such as the lion, the boar, and the apples, while poets elaborated the longer journeys. The labors also served as a cultural map, projecting the reach of Greek experience from familiar hills to distant horizons. The cycle expressed a steady pattern of challenge and solution that communities told and retold across generations, and its measured rhythm continued to define the figure of Hercules in Greek myth. Chapter 6. Hercules and the 12 Labors. The cycle of the 12 labors of Hercules presented a structured account of a hero's service, endurance, and eventual restoration of honor. These tasks formed a connected narrative in which Hercules underwent imposed trials to atone for past violence and to prove his worth before kings and gods. The stories focused on concrete goals such as capturing animals, cleansing places, and retrieving guarded items from distant lands. The sequence illustrated a pattern of human effort set against monsters, wide travel, and divine oversight. Over time, the labors became a shared reference point across Greek communities for what heroic strength and perseverance meant. The tradition placed emphasis on method as much as force, since cleverness and support played roles in many outcomes. The setting lay in the loosely defined heroic age of Greece, when kings ruled fortified cities and the gods intervened openly. The tasks spanned familiar regions such as Argolis, Arcadia, and Eleusis, and reached farther to Crete, Thrace, and the western edges of the Mediterranean. The final labor extended below the earth into Hades. The sequence did not hold a fixed chronological date, since Greek myth did not align these events with a single historical calendar. Local landscapes, caves, rivers, and sanctuaries anchored many episodes, and later travelers and storytellers linked particular rocks, springs, and shrines to specific deeds. The journey moved back and forth between the Peloponnese and more distant shores, adding a sense of orbit around a central royal authority. Heracles, son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene, stood at the center as a figure of strength influenced by divine family tensions. Hera, queen of the gods and wife of Zeus, opposed him out of resentment for Zeus's affair, and her hostility shaped the path of his trials. Eurystheus, king of Mycenae, and often associated with Tiryns, ordered the labors as Heracles' superior, receiving credit for each completion. Iolaus, Heracles' nephew, acted as a companion in certain tasks, most notably against the Hydra. Athena and Hermes offered guidance and equipment at key moments, acting as helpful deities rather than direct commanders. Secondary figures included regional rulers, rival kings, and guardians tied to each task, such as Diomedes in Thrace, Hippolyta among the Amazons, and Geryon at the edge of the Western Sea. The preparation for the labors began when Hera induced a madness in Heracles, and he killed members of his own family. Seeking purification and direction, he consulted the oracle at Delphi, where Apollo's priestess instructed him to serve Eurystheus and perform set tasks. Early tradition spoke of 10 labors, and later versions explained that 2 did not count, raising the total to 12. The first labor sent him to slay the Nemean lion, whose hide resisted all weapons. He strangled the beast with his hands and fashioned its skin into armor. For the second, he fought the Lernaean Hydra, a serpent with many heads that regenerated when cut, with Iolaus cauterizing the necks. He defeated it, but this assistance later caused Eurystheus to disallow the labor. He then pursued the Cyrenian hind, a swift and sacred deer of Artemis, catching it without shedding blood and carrying it back with careful respect for the goddess. The fourth task required capturing the Erymanthian boar alive, which he accomplished by driving the creature into deep snow in the mountains and binding it for transport. The fifth labor demanded the cleansing of the stables of Olgas, who possessed immense herds. Heracles diverted rivers to wash the filth away in a single day, but because he had arranged payment from Olgas and a dispute followed, Eurystheus again declared the task invalid. Moving on, Heracles confronted the Stymphalian birds in Arcadia, using a rattle or castanets given by Athena to flush them from the marshes and shoot them down. He then sailed to Crete to subdue the Cretan bull, and brought it back alive. In Thrace he dealt with the man-eating mares of Diomedes by turning their master's fate upon him, and then calming the horses. The ninth labor led him to the Amazons for the belt of Hippolyta. Initial hospitality reportedly shifted to conflict through divine interference, and Heracles secured the belt before returning. The 10th set him on a western journey to seize the cattle of Geryon, a giant with unusual form living beyond ocean's reach. After a long trek and contests with guardians, he herded the cattle back to Greece, marking places along the route with later famous associations. The 11th labor sought the golden apples of the Hesperides, daughters of the evening, guarded by a serpent named Ladon at the edge of the world. Heracles traveled widely to find their location, and in some versions met Prometheus and freed him from his torment, receiving advice in return. He either slew the serpent or negotiated with Atlas, who briefly took back the sky while Heracles bore the weight, and then returned with the apples by craft. The 12th labor required the capture of Cerberus, the hound of Hades, without using weapons. With Hades' permission obtained through strength and restraint, he subdued Cerberus and brought the creature to Eurystheus, who hid in fear before allowing Heracles to return the guardian to the underworld. With these achievements complete, the service to Eurystheus ended. The rejected labors explained why the total reached 12 rather than 10, and the combination of combat, capture, cleansing, and retrieval covered a full range of heroic skills. Later accounts connected the cycle to Heracles' eventual immortality, but the apotheosis belonged to a separate episode after his death on Mount Oeta. Greek sources preserved several versions of the labors, reflecting local pride, artistic preference, and the needs of performance or education. Apollodorus, Diodorus Siculus, Pindar, and Euripides represented different approaches to the material, and vase painters often chose one moment from a labor to stand for the whole narrative. The order of the tasks, the details of travel, and the role of allies varied, while the core pattern of service under Eurystheus remained stable. The cycle functioned as a pan-Hellenic framework that linked city-states, sanctuaries, and distant horizons into a single route. It presented endurance as a steady accomplishment rather than a burst of glory. Through this measured sequence, Heracles' labours formed a durable outline of heroic work completed under watchful gods and cautious kings. Chapter 7. The Trojan War. Causes, Siege, and Fall. The Trojan War stood as a central cycle in Greek myth, describing a long conflict between the Achaean coalition and the city of Troy that shaped the memory of the heroic age. It told how a dispute begun among gods moved into human affairs, drawing kings and champions across the Aegean, and ending with the fall of a fortified city. The narrative joined personal grievances, competing loyalties, and divine interests, and it traced many figures from youth to death. Poets used the war to explore honor, loss, and the limits of strength, while later communities linked their origins to survivors of its end. The war's episodes were retold in epics, tragedies, and local traditions, and they remained part of shared education in the Greek world. The setting lay in the late Bronze Age, with the Achaean forces sailing from mainland centres such as Mycenae and Sparta toward the Troad on the northwest coast of Anatolia. Troy, also called Ilion, stood near the Dardanelles, guarding access between the Aegean and the Black Sea. The war was said to have lasted 10 years, with long periods of raiding, encampment, and seasonal fighting in the plain before the city walls. The geography featured the Scamander and Simois rivers, the surrounding hills, and coastal islands used as staging points. The timeline in exact years was not fixed in the tradition. Principal figures included leaders and their households on both sides. On the Achaean side, Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, commanded the coalition, while his brother Menelaus, king of Sparta, had lost Helen to the Trojan prince Paris. The strongest Achaean fighter was Achilles, son of Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, accompanied by his close companion Patroclus. Other key Achaean leaders included Odysseus of Ithaca, valued for counsel, Nestor of Pylos, valued for experience, Diomedes of Argos, the Ajaxes, Telamonian Ajax and the lesser Ajax of Locris, and the seer Calchas. On the Trojan side, Priam and Hecuba ruled a large royal family. Their sons included Hector, the foremost defender, and Paris, whose actions began the conflict. Aeneas, son of Anchises and Aphrodite, fought among the Trojans and survived the fall. Cassandra foretold disasters but was not believed. The gods favoured different sides. Hera and Athena favoured the Achaeans. Aphrodite and Apollo favoured the Trojans. Zeus kept a balance when it suited him. According to the mythic cause, discord began at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, when Eris cast a golden apple for the fairest. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite claimed it, and Paris judged in favour of Aphrodite after receiving the promise of Helen. Paris then visited Sparta, and with Aphrodite's aid he departed with Helen and treasure. Menelaus invoked an oath sworn by Helen's former suitors, binding them to support the chosen husband, and the Achaean leaders gathered a fleet. The army assembled at Aulis in Boeotia, where unfavourable winds delayed departure. Artemis's anger was said to have halted the fleet until Agamemnon appeased her. Accounts differed on how he did so. The Achaeans reached the Troad and established a camp on the shore. Early raids supplied the army and captured neighbouring towns, which shaped later resentments within the camp. The siege settled into cycles of battle, truces and negotiations, with both sides receiving help from their divine patrons. Conflict within the Achaean camp moved events. A quarrel arose when Agamemnon returned a captive at Apollo's demand, and then claimed Briseis from Achilles as compensation. Achilles withdrew from fighting in anger, calling on Thetis, who asked Zeus to favour the Trojans until the Achaeans felt his absence. The Trojans gained ground and pressed the Achaeans back toward their ships. The Iliad focused on a short period during this crisis. Patroclus, seeing the danger, wore Achilles' armour and led the Myrmidons to push the Trojans from the ships. He drove them back but went too far and faced Hector, who killed him with Apollo's aid. News of Patroclus's death moved Achilles to return. Prometheus asked Hephaestus to forge new armour for him. Achilles reconciled with Agamemnon and re-entered the fighting. Achilles' return turned the tide. He cut down many foes and met Hector before the walls of Troy. Hector faced him, they fought, and Achilles killed him. He dragged Hector's body behind his chariot, which shocked both sides. Priam, guided by Hermes, came to the Achaean camp to ransom his son. Achilles received him, accepted the ransom, and returned the body for burial, and a truce allowed funeral rites. Later episodes outside the Iliad completed the war's course. Achilles was killed near the Scaean Gate, tradition commonly named Paris as the archer and Apollo as a helper. The Achaeans brought in new allies and stratagems. Odysseus and Diomedes captured the Trojan seer Helenus, who told them what conditions would lead to Troy's fall. They fetched Philoctetes, who held the bow of Heracles, and he killed Paris. Odysseus proposed a wooden horse, and Epeius built it with Athena's guidance. The Achaean fleet withdrew from sight, leaving Sinon to convince the Trojans the horse was an offering. Laocoon warned against it and was killed by serpents. This event was cited as a sign. The Trojans brought the horse into the city. At night, the Achaean force returned. Warriors hidden in the horse opened the gates, and the returning army entered. The city fell to fire and sword. Priam was killed by Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles. Cassandra was taken by Ajax of Locris from Athena's temple, an act later blamed for storms and wrecks on the return voyages. Aeneas escaped with his father and son. Details of his route belong to later traditions. Menelaus recovered Helen. Some accounts said he raised his sword and then relented. Other accounts varied. The fate of Hector's son Astyanax differed among versions. The surviving women were divided as captives among the Icarian leaders. Troy's destruction ended the immediate conflict, and the Icarians prepared to sail home. Their returns, called the Nostoi, brought new trials. Agamemnon reached Mycenae and was killed by Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. Odysseus wandered for years before returning to Ithaca. Nestor and Diomedes reached home with fewer losses. The fall of Troy closed one arc and began several others. The main poetic sources included Homer's Iliad, which covered only a few weeks near the end of the war, and the Odyssey, which reflected on its consequences. Lost cyclic epics, such as the Cypria, the Aethiopus, the Little Iliad, the Sack of Ilion, and the Nostoi, once filled gaps. Later tragedians and historians reworked the material. Archaeological work at Hisarlik revealed multiple destruction layers. The alignment between layers and legend remained a scholarly question. Many details varied by region and author, including the duration of the war, the manner of certain deaths, and the fate of individual survivors. Despite differences, the pattern of cause, siege, and fall remained stable. The war's end set the stage for stories of return and foundation that followed. Chapter 9: Odysseus and the Long Way Home. The Odyssey told how Odysseus traveled from Troy to Ithaca, and how his wit and endurance guided him. It showed the shifting favor of gods, the bonds of family, and the customs of hospitality. The tale moved through islands and seas, from known shores to imagined edges of the world. It explained why a victorious hero returned late, and how his household survived his absence. It balanced adventure with the quiet work of waiting, weaving, and planning. It placed cleverness beside courage, and treated both as tools for survival. The setting lay in the years after the fall of Troy, during a legendary past remembered in archaic Greece. The route stretched across the Aegean and into distant waters, including places given names like Aea, Ogygia, and the land of the Phaeacians. Ithaca stood as a small island kingdom in the Ionian Sea, rugged and valued for its people rather than its wealth. Palaces were imagined with storerooms, courtyards, and halls where feasts took place. The exact dates were unknown. The principal figures centered on Odysseus, king of Ithaca, known for strategy and persuasive speech. His wife Penelope guarded the household with patience and careful thought, and their son Telemachus grew from youth into early manhood. Athena favored Odysseus for his intelligence and aided him at key moments. Poseidon opposed him after the blinding of Poseidon's son Polyphemus. Among mortals he met Calypso, a nymph who detained him, and Circe, a goddess who first bewitched and then helped him. He encountered Polyphemus the Cyclops, the wind-keeper Aeolus, the Laestrygonians, and the shades of the dead guided by Tiresias. He sailed past Sirens and between Scylla and Charybdis, and he faced the cattle of Helios and the judgment of Zeus. Later he found refuge with the Phaeacians, ruled by Alcinous and Arete, and welcomed by their daughter Nausicaa. At home he relied on the swineherd Eumaeus and the cowherd Philoetius, and he met recognition from the nurse Euryclea. His return brought conflict with suitors led by Antinous and Eurymachus, and it ended with a last scene that involved his father Laertes. After Troy fell, Odysseus set sail with his companions and faced early troubles. On the coast of the Sicyonos they took a city but lingered too long and suffered losses in a counterattack. A storm drove them to the land of the Lotus Eaters, where some tasted a plant that dulled their will to return. Odysseus brought them back to the ships by force. They next landed in the country of the Cyclopes, and entered the cave of Polyphemus, where hospitality was denied and men were killed. Odysseus devised an escape by calling himself No One, blinding the giant after making him drunk, and leaving under the bellies of sheep. As he sailed away he called out his true name, and Polyphemus prayed to Poseidon to punish him. Odysseus then reached Aeolus, who gave him a bag of winds and sent him on a fair course. Ithaca came into sight, but his companions, thinking the bag held treasure, opened it, and the winds blew them back. The Laestrygonians attacked in the next harbour, smashed the ships with stones, and speared men like fish. Only Odysseus's vessel escaped. He came to Aea, and Circe turned some of his men into swine. With help from Hermes, he resisted her magic and secured their release. They stayed for a long season, and then on her advice, he sailed to the land of the dead to speak with Tiresias. In the Dark Realm he met the ghost of his mother Anticlea, and learned from Tiresias how to appease Poseidon, how to avoid the cattle of Helios, and how his return would unfold. On the way back he passed the Sirens, whose song promised knowledge. He stopped his crew's ears with wax and had himself tied to the mast. He steered between Scylla and Charybdis, losing men to the six-headed creature rather than risking total destruction in the whirlpool. He came to Thrinacia, where Helios pastured sacred cattle, and though he warned his companions, hunger and a storm trapped them. In his absence they slaughtered the cattle. Helios demanded justice, and Zeus struck the ship with a bolt. All the men died, and only Odysseus survived, clinging to wreckage. The currents carried him to Aegea, where Calypso kept him for years and offered immortality if he stayed. The gods finally sent Hermes to command his release, and Calypso, though unwilling, helped him build a raft. Poseidon broke the raft with a storm, but Odysseus swam to the shore of the Phaeacians, where Nausicaa found him and guided him to the palace of Alcinous and Arete. He received clothing, food, and safe conduct. After he revealed his name, he recounted his journeys to the court. The Phaeacians brought him home by ship and left him sleeping on the shore with gifts. In Ithaca, Athena disguised him as a beggar. He met Eumaeus, learned of the suitor's waste, and reunited quietly with Telemachus. Together they planned. He entered the hall in disguise, endured taunts, and took note of his allies. Euryclea recognized him by a scar while washing his feet, and she kept the secret. Penelope announced a contest with the great bow of Odysseus, to string it and shoot an arrow through lined axes. The contest failed for the suitors, and he, still in disguise, handled the bow with ease, strung it, and made the shot. He stood revealed, with Telemachus, Eumaeus and Philœtius at his side. They closed the doors and fought. Antinous fell first, then Eurymachus, and the others died or fled. Odysseus ordered the hall cleansed. Penelope tested him by speaking of their marriage bed, rooted into a living tree. His knowledge of its construction proved his identity. Peace did not come at once because the families of the suitors gathered to avenge them. Athena intervened to end the cycle of retaliation. Odysseus went to see Laertes, and the line of his house stood together again. The Odyssey belonged to an oral tradition credited to Homer, and its episodes showed layers from different periods. Later poets and playwrights adjusted details, and some island names shifted across maps. Dates, exact routes, and locations of places like Ogygia and Aiaia remained uncertain, and ancient commentators offered differing opinions. The poem expressed values such as hospitality, cunning, restraint, and respect for the gods, and it explained why a hero's glory included patience as well as strength. In gentle measure, the story closed with a home restored and a long voyage finally at rest. Chapter 10. Legacy and Transmission Through Time. The legacy and transmission of Greek mythology covered the long path by which the stories of gods and heroes moved from local songs to a shared heritage across many cultures. It traced how tales were first spoken, then written and pictured, and how they were copied, studied, and adapted. It showed how new generations changed the stories while keeping familiar names and themes. It also explained how the myths survived changes in religion, politics, and language. Over time, the myths became part of education, art, and moral discussion, even when belief in the gods faded. The chapter ended by noting that the durability of these stories rested on both memory and record, and on the usefulness of myths as a way to talk about human choices. The setting ranged across centuries and regions. It began in the archaic period of Greece and continued through the classical and Hellenistic ages. It passed into the Roman world, lasted into late antiquity, and then moved through the Byzantine Empire and the Latin West. It reached Renaissance Italy, early modern Europe, and later the wider world. The places included the Greek mainland, the Aegean Islands, and Asia Minor, with later centers in Alexandria and Rome. Monastic scriptoria, imperial courts, universities, and city workshops each served as points of preservation. When exact times for specific transitions were unclear, historians used the broad markers of these periods as a frame. The principal figures of transmission included poets, playwrights, scholars, teachers, and artists. Homer and Hesiod shaped early written forms. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides staged myths in tragedies that set characters and conflicts in memorable patterns. Pindar tied heroic narratives to city pride through odes. Hellenistic scholars at Alexandria, such as Aristarchus of Samothrace, edited texts and wrote commentaries. Mythographers like Apollodorus, now called Pseudo-Apollodorus for clarity, organized tales into handbooks. Pausanias described sanctuaries and local traditions in his travel writing. Roman authors, including Virgil and Ovid, retold Greek stories in Latin, while Gaius Julius Hyginus compiled summaries. Later Christian writers, such as Clement of Alexandria and Augustine, explained and criticized the old myths. Scribes and humanists in Byzantium and Renaissance Italy copied and studied the texts. In Rome, Greek deities were identified with Roman ones, such as Zeus with Jupiter and Athena with Minerva, and this pairing helped the myths travel under familiar names. The basic path began with oral performance. Singers recited and reshaped stories at feasts, festivals, and games. With the spread of writing, epic poems were fixed in written form, and dramatists developed full scenes and speeches for familiar legends. Visual artists painted episodes on pottery and carved them on temples, creating a second record that supported the literary one. As libraries grew, especially in Alexandria, scholars compared manuscripts, corrected lines, and explained difficult passages. They kept variant versions in notes, so different local traditions were not lost. The Roman Republic and Empire brought the Greek stories to new audiences. Translators and poets refitted Greek myths to Roman history and values, linking heroic foundations to Roman places and lineages. Public monuments and private houses displayed myth scenes in mosaics and frescoes, which introduced the stories to people who did not read the texts. The development continued through changes in religion and society. As Christianity spread, imperial laws ended public sacrifices, and many temples were closed or converted. But the myths remained in schools as models for language and style. Teachers used the stories to teach grammar and rhetoric, while church authors framed them as cultural history or moral examples. In the Byzantine East, scholars preserved Greek texts. In the Latin West, compendia and encyclopedias kept names and summaries alive. The Renaissance brought renewed interest in Greek, fueling new copies and translations. Artists depicted myth scenes to explore beauty, proportion, and human emotion. Printers multiplied texts, making standard versions more accessible. In the 19th century, archaeology at sites like Troy and Knossos gave context that encouraged fresh readings of old tales, though the link between finds and stories was often debated. By the 20th century, myths appeared in school curricula, literature, scientific names, and popular media, while academic studies examined their structure, meaning, and social use. The context of variation remained important across the entire tradition. Greek myth did not have a single official canon, and many regional versions coexisted. Some stories had multiple endings, some heroes had different parents depending on the source. Art sometimes preserved scenes that texts did not explain, and texts sometimes described rituals that art did not show. Modern editors noted these differences and marked uncertain lines or missing passages. In each period, people chosen for cultural leadership decided which versions to copy, teach, or illustrate, creating a chain of selection as well as preservation. The result was a layered record in which old and new stood together. Through this steady process, Greek mythology moved beyond its first audiences and became a durable language for thinking about the world, ending the story of its transmission on a calm and lasting note.